All right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the Team and Mentors Support Committee, the inaugural call. We're going to plan on doing a Q&A session. And if anybody has questions, feel free to post them in the chat or shout them out, unmute, shout them out. The purpose of this call is to tailor it to what you guys want to hear. So we've got an agenda. We can throw a bunch of information at you. But if you want to hear something specific, make that clear either via the chat or by speaking up. So if anybody has anything out of the gate, we'll wait a little bit, either take it via the chat or I'll defer if anyone wants to speak up. Hi, Curtis. All right. So seeing no questions out of the gate, we're going to start off by kind of giving you guys an update on the build season progress. I can speak to a few of the teams that I've worked with, and we can kind of go through the list of people. Right now, we've got on our committee, we've got Corey Applegate from 3244. We've got Chris Rodefelt. We've got a Nick Arstead from 2220 and Jason Herzog from 2239. So we are on the Team and Mentor Support Committee, and we'll kind of be running you through this meeting today. So in terms of build season progress, how far along should you be? Where should your team be at right now? Well, it's kind of it's a wide open question. Some teams have absolutely nothing built, and some teams have most of their robot put together at this point. And I would say in order to be on track, you would want to have a very good idea for what your final robot will look like. And ideally at this point, you've got a drivetrain, if not completed, close to being completed. Right now, 4607, the team that I mentor, has, I would say, maybe 60% of our mechanical done, 0% of our electrical done, and programming is doing a little bit, doing work in parallel. So I would say we're about on track with where we've been in the past, and we're getting there. Jason, how is 2239 doing?
Yeah, so we decided to go with the kit of parts drivetrain again this year. So we've got two of those driving. One of them has we're calling it a launcher mounted on it with no way we just hand feed them. And so it's mounted in the correct height, and we hand feed. That's probably iteration 5 or 6 maybe of the launcher. And then it's got an intake with some bumpers that are just pool noodles with fabric taped onto them in the front, and it just intakes balls into open space in the middle of the robot. So there's no way for it to connect intaking the ball to shooting it right now, but we can drive around and intake them and launch them on one of the robots.
Wow, that's awesome. How are you doing, Nick, with 2220?
Well, we were stuck in CAD land for a few weeks. And we actually just got our first set of parts off the CNC router Saturday night. So I'm at home, but my team's right now at the shop cutting parts, trying to get everything ready. But the design V1 it's coming together. So pretty happy with where things are at right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. How's everything going for you, Corey?
Our team's probably close to parallel to CIS's. We're 60% built. Our drivetrain is built with our last year's components. We just have to swap out gearboxes and put competition chains in. The shooter box has gone through several iterations and it's in its final iteration on the robot. Conceptual, we have our intake will be done probably today. We're setting the heights of the intake and the bumpers. Our climb has a good concept of how we're going to deploy it on a mock-up chassis. The only thing we haven't really put any time or consideration into is the color wheel. And our goal is tonight is to back our current robot up to the trench run and take a look at what is possible. No electronics.
All right. Sounds like we're all kind of in the same boat. Nobody has scored a power cell with their robot yet, which is kind of my benchmark for feeling good about where I'm at in the build season. Personally, I really hate the time between the end of the strategic analysis and the robot being built and driving, because I'm a strategy guy. I like seeing the robot perform, and I'm pretty impatient when it comes to the build stuff. But we're at that point in the build season, and it sounds like we're all kind of progressing along. If you hear where we are, and you feel like your team is not there, if you think you're very far behind, definitely reach out to anybody in this chat. We're all available. Our emails are on the chat here. Reach out. We can put you in contact with people who can help, or we can help ourselves. So definitely do that. Now, the robot isn't everything with FIRST. I'll defer to Nick to talk a little bit about award submission deadlines, which are coming up, and how 2220 is doing with those.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a couple of key deadlines coming up right now for awards. One coming up real fast is that February 6th deadline for Chairman's Award and Woody Flowers Award. That's mildly scary. And then on the 13th, we've got the Dean's List Award. So I just want to say one thing about Dean's List before we talk about the other awards. Like, guys, every year I see teams like that don't get Dean's List in, right? There are so many great kids on any team that like deserve to get nominated at least for that award. Like, make it happen. Sorry, I got some background noise. All right, so as far as how far along, right now where 2220 is sitting is we've got drafts of stuff done, but we're not totally done yet, and we definitely aren't submitted yet. Where I'd like recommend, if you're looking at award submissions right now, where you should probably be is hopefully in that space, get to a draft as soon as possible, start identifying those people that you're going to start asking for a review. There's some emails on there. If you want to hit it up, hit anybody on there up. That's Ryan at the top, Jason in the middle, and myself on the bottom. I've taken a look at a lot of Chairman's essays and a lot of Woody Flowers essays, and a lot of Dean's List essays over the years. So if you want to set of eyes on your stuff for some feedback on proofreading or any of that, like any of us are willing to take a look at that, give you some feedback. Personally, always in confidence, right? My team doesn't see any essays I see. I'm sure if somebody's listening, I don't see anybody in the chat, fortunately, from my team listening. It might be a surprise to them that I do that because I like to keep it away from them. Everybody else, how's CIS doing? How's 2239 doing? How anybody in the chat?
I can speak to our progress on awards. I'm adjacently involved. I'm not on the awards team, but this past Saturday I kind of sat in a little bit, and we were working on our executive summary for the Chairman's Award. I would say we're probably about 90% along with our executive summary. Our essay is more or less completed. It's not submitted yet, but we've got the bulk of it is there. I would call it 99% completed. Our Woody Flowers and Dean's List, we still had students submitting to be Dean's List nominees, so that is very far from complete. And I think Woody Flowers, we've got our nominee figured out, and the students are working on their essay submission right now. And obviously with 3 days to go, that'll be a time crunch. I would say this is probably about where we were last year. We're not super far ahead. We've got, I think, good content. I think we've had a lot of eyes on it. One thing that we really, really push for is to have a lot of people peer review, both inside and outside of FIRST. The more eyes that end up on your documents, the better, the more polished they are. So within FIRST, there's this, sometimes people are secretive They're worried that if they show what they have, that somehow they'll be at a competitive disadvantage. That's something that I would love to see break down as FUM kind of grow, the FUM area, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, as the competitive robotics hubs kind of become a thing. And I'm hoping that silos break down. I'm hoping that teams work together as much as possible, because it'll benefit all of us in the long run. So we're still in the process of having people peer review everything, but I like where we're going. How's everything going for you, Jason?
Yeah, so they're coming along. I'm realizing I haven't heard a single thing about woody flowers even mentioned this year, so I don't know what that means and what that entails. So maybe we're not submitting anything, maybe we are, I have no idea. The chairman's is coming along pretty well. Last year was the first year we submitted it all, and we learned a lot going through that process. And then we took that and we spent a lot of time talking to other teams. So some of you might know that we've had a close relationship with Edina. They seem to have done chairmans decently recently. So we spent a lot of time asking them questions, and other teams in the area and across the Twin Cities. But one thing that we've always done for awards, is we send the students out to their English teachers and have their English teachers review them. And the English teachers are generally happy to review anything the students are writing by choice. So we usually get pretty good feedback from that. And it usually predisposes the teachers to believe that the students are better writers than they are, or at least be happy that they're writing and their grades get a nice little bump, I believe, as a result. So we kind of use that one as a win-win. The students get a little help showing the teachers that they're practicing writing and doing writing and learning the things that the teachers have taught them. And we get some feedback on our writing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great point about having English teachers in particular. They're very, very helpful. One of our co-mentors or co-coaches is an English teacher, and he's been instrumental in helping with our submissions. Corey, how's it going for you guys? Are you submitting for any awards?
I just recently started hearing some chatter about awards. Dean's List is, I believe we only have one student on the team that's eligible for that. So that person will be nominated. The paper's being written up right. As for chairmans, we've been hit and miss on that in years. We did sit down early this fall or late this fall and looked at our 3-year plan, and with just the restructure of our coaching and we're a very rookie student-based team, we kind of are passing on the chairmans. We know that's frowned upon, but I don't believe that's getting the effort into it right now. And I've heard some chatter about the woody flowers. I assume we've always put in for that one. And it's just been a real recent talk in the last week or so. So we're behind the 8 ball on that one, but awards will be submitted in a few categories.
So Corey, to your point about chairman's submissions being it being frowned upon to not submit them, I would disagree with that. I think if you're a team that, especially if you're a young team, the process of submitting the award is definitely valuable. It enables a lot of diverse groups of students to participate in the program. But if you don't have the bandwidth to submit for it, if your team isn't built for it, it's not worth burning yourself out as a coach to stretch and try to submit for it. The process is great, but if you don't have the foundation to do a good job with it, I don't think it's frowned upon to not submit at all. If every team submitted, that would be 63 submissions that the judges would have to go through. And more than likely, that's not realistic at a typical regional. I think on average, maybe between 10 and 20 teams submit, 20 on the high end, 10 on the low end. I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
Well, real quick there, Ryan, thanks for that rebuttal there and kind of supporting that decision, because I was a little nervous on that statement, but that definitely helps
Yeah.
our decision to skip it this year. Our 3-year plan does have at least 1 to 2 submissions, and now with the new recording all the different things that you do, that Alex Yerk pointed out this last hub meeting, that we'll have to get busy recording everything and actually get a temperature of all the things that our team does, because we know we're active, we just have no documentation on how active we are. And I think once we get that documentation, it'll come pretty apparent that, hey, we should really be submitting.
Yeah, so I'm looking at, so I have a bunch of data actually on how many teams submitted at various events from about 2015 to this year. And like, you see it really all over the place in terms of how many teams are submitting at events. Like, there are events that I'm looking at that had 7 teams submit. There are events that had 40 teams submit over the years. Like, for a long time, I put a lot of effort into trying to grab that data to kind of understand what different environments look like. Like, it's really all over the place as far as how many teams are submitting. I don't think, I haven't been in the judging room, but I doubt that that's held against you on any level there, and certainly on a team level. Like most people aren't even really looking for whether your team submitted. Like, it's the only place that it is at an event is on that sign up sheet for whether you've submitted. So I don't think it's a huge judgment thing. And like Ryan said, like, you got to pick your team's priorities. Like, you have to say these things are important to us. And if you're not hyped for chairmans, if the students aren't hyped for chairmans that year, if you aren't going to get anything out of it, trying to do it, like, yeah, backing off for a year, backing off for a few years makes sense. Certainly, I used to mentor a less resource team than 2220, and for them, that was actually the first year. Like, they're like, we're going to submit for chairmans. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure you really want to? Like, this is a team that struggled to even put robots on the field and on any level. And I don't know, like, we ended up submitting that year because we had some kids that were hyped about it, but that was it made a lot of sense for us to not do it that year.
That's super interesting, especially with where you guys have gotten to from where you were. I mean, being a finalist in what was 2018, right? At the World Championship. That's just. Oh, go ahead.
That wasn't 2220 that I was talking about taking the time
off.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, that was a few years back. I was mentoring a different team that I won't mention exactly who they are, but 2020 has been submitting since 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Like, I can look back and find all of our submissions every year since then.
That makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
How do you go from not submitting or not being able to submit to being a finalist? But that makes
no.
But to your point, it is absolutely a resource-based decision that each team has to make, and no team should feel bad for the decision that they make. So I think we've covered awards pretty well. For those new people who have joined, I'll once again cover that this is meant to be an interactive question and answer forum. So if you've got a question, definitely type it in the chat or unmute your mic and speak it out. We want to address the things that you are thinking about. And if you don't have anything, we'll continue on with our planned agenda.
Or if you just want to talk about something.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to talk about something, like, it's okay to not have it be a like, how do I do this thing? Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening this season. There's always an interesting stuff to talk about with robots, and sometimes,
absolutely. We could talk about the implications of no bag. We could talk about what we think of different events. So no topic is off the table. But until we hear, we got something from Curtis. Beyond Chairmans and Woody, I'm interested in anyone who has done the Entrepreneurship Award. We're looking to try it this year, but don't really know a starting point.
All right, I got this one, Ryan.
Oh, yeah, go for it, Jason.
All right, so entrepreneurship, we've won the last 2 years now. It is the first award we've submitted ever. So 2 years ago was the first time we submitted any awards, right? So we chose it as our first award to go for, right? Especially now, Entrepreneurship Award doesn't have a deadline, right? You bring your business plan to the event, to your regional. You have it on hand for when the judges come around, right? And you show it to them, you talk about it. There's not a submission online for it. So the biggest part of it is doing the business plan, and the biggest part of that is follow the rubric. I think at one point someone was telling me in general at regionals, half of the submitted business plans didn't meet the rubric and were immediately thrown out. Right, so just following the rubric gets you half to the top half of the pile right there. So follow the rubric. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy, and the things it's asking you to do are things that are good for determining kind of how to run your team, or how to shore up weaknesses, or how to find ways to leverage your strengths anyway. So it's things that are really good for team planning in general. A SWOT analysis, recording your budget, talking about what you do for marketing, right? Those kind of things. So they're really good activities to do with your team in general. But if you're just looking for an award to get you started on the submissions, I'd say entrepreneurship is the best starting place. So once you have that business plan, right, the next part is training students who are going to be in your pits, who are going to be there when judges come around to talk about your business plan, and not just what's in the business plan, but how does it relate to your team, and how does it drive what your team decides to do, and how they decide to do things. So if you look at the rubric for the Entrepreneurship Award, it talks about some of the things that judges are going to ask, right? So in terms of versus chairman's, where a lot of teams are going, I don't even know what to expect when I get into the room, right? I don't even know what my video should look like, or what my presentation should look like. The Entrepreneurship Award pretty much just says, here's what we're going to ask you, here's what you need to present, right? So it's a really good starting place to get into it. And then, like I said, the biggest thing is training students, not just the students who worked on it, but the other students who are going to be in the pit, right? So training the team, the people who are working on your robot in between matches, right? And those judges don't necessarily come around at a specific time. So you kind of just have to train the people who are going to be there to be ready to talk about it.
That's awesome, Jason. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that?
I will add, so we did a presentation at Jumpstart on the Entrepreneurship Award, which is on our website at technocrats2239.org. So that whole presentation is available, and you're welcome to go through it.
Yeah, and really what Jason was saying about training the students that are going to be talking to judges, that applies for every single award. If you're targeting an award, or if you just want to be up for any award, prepping students is huge. And like 2220 the last few years has traveled to our events, so we'll have a bus ride, do that. Not all teams do things like that, but last few years that's something that we set up some drills for students, to asking them various questions about the team, asking them various stuff about the robot, about numbers in our chairman's submission. They'll get quizzed on it, because when I say any student that could be talking to the judges, any of your students could end up talking to the judges. Any student can end up talking to the judges. And we come at it from a pretty intense view of that, but that applies for any event. Never know when the blue shirts are going to show up and start asking somebody questions.
So similarly to Nick, I can say that we do put a lot of emphasis on training our students about our team history, so that they can speak to anybody in an educated way about our award submissions and just where we've been and what we're doing. But the value of that is it goes way beyond FIRST. It goes way beyond judges. The kids that we have that are trained in and on how to talk to judges, those skills are transferable in any part of their lives. And there's just a ton of value in enabling STEM-oriented students to be able to talk to people, to be able to network, communicate. Communication is one of the most important things that you can do. And if you can communicate effectively as an engineer, you're going to go places. And I think a lot of students have benefited from that with our program. So moving on, unless there's more interest in us talking about that, again, mention that in the chat. Chris, if you're able to scroll down to available resources and we can touch on what is currently available. If you're able to scroll back up a little bit, it's split on both pages. Perfect. So we can start to talk a little bit about what available resources are out there for teams in the FUM area, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. But not only us, it's everybody, right? These resources are publicly available. One thing that I would like to start with is your local teams, right? In Minnesota, we've got this thing called HACs, hubs, alliances, and coalitions. They're all the same thing. They're called differently, but basically it's your group of local teams that, your network of local teams that you can reach out to. So in Minnesota, we've got what we call the Central Minnesota Robotics Hub, and I believe we're up to 21 teams, and we've got an email chain going. We meet every Friday and we talk through how our build season's going. Each Friday, each week has a different topic, and I'll let Corey touch on that a little bit. Do you know, Jason, what hub, alliance, or coalition is 2239 involved with?
Yeah, so we're in the Southwest Hub. So Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, we go all the way out to Norwood, Young America, down in, I don't think we really go south of the Minnesota River, but we get mixed attendance at meetings. We get quite a bit of different people each meeting, which is nice, different teams each meeting. And so I know for us, we are primarily focused on having students attend. And we want the students from each team to talk to each other. And then the mentors usually end up talking logistics of running the Southwest Hub Week 0 event during our meetings. But the goal is getting the students to talk to each other between teams for us, which is nice because then the students have a resource to go to that's a little bit more useful than Chief Delphi, a little bit more engaging, and we get a lot of students figuring out how to get parts made at other teams or share information and pictures between teams.
Yeah, it's an invaluable resource. It's really cool to see the growth of the HACs over the years. I know prior to 2015, I think the Southwest Hub might have been the only really well-organized hub, alliance, or coalition. Maybe the Seven Rivers Coalition was a thing. But now Curtis knows this well. We've got the Northern Minnesota Robotics Conference. They do their own off-season event. But basically, the most valuable resource to you is your local teams. So if you're able to reach out to them, that should be your first point of contact. Another great resource is the TAMS committee. We're the Team and Mentors Support Committee. We were developed under FUM, first in the Upper Midwest, which is now the first organizing partner, hopefully going forward. And we help to organize the FRC program in the region. But basically, we want to network with teams. We want to connect teams with people that are able to make their lives easier. We want to make it easier for mentors to mentor, and we want to make it easier for teams to have success, however they define that. And so you can reach out to us anytime for any reason. All of us love talking robots, and if we can't help you, we can absolutely find somebody who is available to help you. And right now I'd like to defer to Chris before we move on to talk a little bit about the CSAs and the system that we currently have in place for reaching out to them.
Sure. So as of right now, well, it's actually been this way for a few years. We've had multiple lines of communication to the CSAs. Todd is a CSA. I'm a CSA. There's a few others around, and I'm assuming you guys all know what CSAs are, so I'll spare you that. But we've got a First MN CSA Slack. That seems to be where most of people come to us for help. We also have email that's available, and that's again in the chat if you want to take a look at that. And we're around year round. So if you got any questions on coding, or if you want to do something and you're not sure how to do it, feel free to hit us up. We'll help you out as much as we can.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. And yeah, they're an invaluable resource. We're getting to that point in the season where you might need help with troubleshooting an electrical issue, or especially programming. If you're programming in any of the major languages, the CSA helpline has somebody who can help you. And if they don't, we've got people who can help you. It's all about networking. And first, the more connections you have, the more easily you can address the problems that you run into. So another really great resource available is called the Open Alliance. They're on Chief Delphi. It's a collection of teams that they realize the value of having an open build, and they publish it for the world to see. So I mean, you've got very, very high-level teams on this list. I know many of the mentors for these teams. They're incredible people. The content that they publish is it's amazing stuff. It's truly, the amount of work that goes into it is just crazy. It's probably as much work going into the documentation as it is going into the build of their robot itself. So if you haven't already checked out the Open Alliance, I highly recommend doing so. A lot of them have build blogs going on that website. Definitely check that out. Another really great resource was published earlier in the year. Now, if you're at a point in the build season where you're just way behind, you don't have anything done, you're struggling at every turn, 118, the Robonauts, they publish a thing every year going back to, I think, 2017, called the 118 Everybot. Basically, the purpose of the Everybot is it's a effective, affordable, and competitive solution for the FRC robotics competition season. So this year they built a low-only robot that can climb effectively, and in a practice match that they had, they scored 35 power cells down low in the low goal, or in the lower port. So if you're running into a wall, they're absolutely, the resources are published. You can build that robot with less than $1,000 using primarily kit of parts resources. And I think most teams should be able to build that in under 3 weeks, meaning enough time left in the year that you could get that done. Another resource, which was already mentioned, Chief Delphi. Definitely check that website out. I know I'm on there way too much. You'll probably see me posting quite a bit. We also have a Slack channel. So it's called the Minnesota FRC Network. This was created a few years ago. It's migrated from GroupMe to Slack. We've got, I want to say, over 100 people representing more than 30 teams. It's a really great resource. It's a Slack channel. You can just post your problem, and then minutes later you'll have 5 people replying. It's a great network, absolutely something that you should join. I shared a link to this document up in the chat, and definitely click on that, copy and paste the join link, and we would love to have more representation from around the state. So regarding resources, am I forgetting anything? Can anybody think of anything that is available to teams that we haven't talked about? All right, I'll take the deafening silence as a no. So now we can go into my favorite topic, and a topic that is hopefully settled for a lot of teams, but that is infinite recharge strategy discussion. How do we think the game will play out? And I know I've got my opinions, but I would love to hear, we'll go around the horn. We'll get opinions from everybody. Just how do you think the game will play out? What are your impressions from the game? What kind of robots do you think we'll see? What do you think the high score will be? And just give your opinions. So we'll start with Nick. I want to hear, what do you think? How will things play out?
Man.
Putting you on
Calling
the
me
spot.
out. Yeah. So I'd like, one of the things I get always frightened out about when I like see discussions on Chief and stuff like that is, and that I'm getting frightened of this year, is how much people are focused on shooting the balls, like shooting those power cells. Like obviously important part of the game. But I'm mildly concerned at how much, like, I've seen a ton of stuff on people. I threw a shooter on something, but the climb is like, if you look at like playing into quals, playing into eliminations, like that climb is so incredibly important. Like, and having a reliable climb, like I always get concerned when I see like whatever the highly attractive option is for game strategies, right? In this case, shooting, that teams ignore stuff that might be more critical to the game. Like this year it's that climb. There's a ranking point in there. If you're running a reliable climb, there's a ranking point and there's 25 points in there. If you could do that. And some of those Robot in 3 Days teams had good climb. Some of them didn't. But that's, I don't know, that's where my head's at with strategy, is just like, I am concerned about teams climbing, and how many teams are going to actually be able to climb reliably in most of their matches.
Yeah, I'm going to add on to Nick's point here. The one thing I'm most afraid of right now, or most concerned about on our team, is that we haven't climbed with a robot a week ago. Right, so everything else is about at the same point of level of finished. The launcher, the launcher's ahead of that. The intake, the feed system, everything else is about at the same level as the climber. But the getting up there and climbing and not getting a lot of practice is my number one concern. I mean, we're also going to a week 1 event, so we'll be the first ones to see how it plays out. So I want to see how it plays out before I get there, if I at all I can. But I think that's my biggest concern, because 25 points is a lot of points, right, for one team to get. And so missing those 25 points, having been a team that has been out there on the field in playoffs, and someone decided, oh, I'll just get one more cycle rather than go do the end game, and then you lose the match because they missed on the shots, or even they made the shots, but the shots weren't enough to make up for how much they missed by missing end game.
Yeah,
it hurts.
Yeah, well, and like that climb is, it's not just that 25 points, right? It's that ranking point. And if you get 3 teams that can climb, that's an easy ranking point. Two teams in a balance, a little bit dicier, right? Yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think climbing is critical. So there was a term coined in 2017 called climb roulette. And basically the principle was climbing was so overvalued that year that if one of your alliance partners didn't climb, no matter what else you did in the game, it was difficult to win the game. And so similarly, climb roulette, if you are paired with a bunch of teams that can't climb, there's nothing you can do about it. You're destined to lose a lot of matches. So I think climb roulette is going to be, if not back in full force, it'll be back somewhat. I think if you are down a climb, down 25 points, the difference between 2017 and this year is that if you do a solo balanced climb, you're only down by 10 points because you still get the 15 for balancing. So if I'm working on a climber, I'm prioritizing the ability to balance on my own. The ability to strafe along the climbing bar is something I've heard talked about a lot. I don't think that will be necessary. I think figuring out how not to sway back and forth and figuring out how to climb in a very stable way will be way more valuable than trying to figure out a way to strafe back and forth on the bar. The reason being is you can coordinate with your alliance partners, and obviously in quals, it's a difficult thing to do to effectively execute upon a strategy, but you should be able to coordinate with your alliance partners that you lift at the same time so that neither of you are rocking, that the bar isn't rocking back and forth. But if you're not a stable climb, if you're not mechanically attached to the bar, rather than say dropping a hook and swaying back and forth on a hook, if you're mechanically attached to the bar, I think you've got a lot better chance of balancing climbs, of solo balancing climbs, and just generally getting more climbing points. So yeah, climbing is critical. There's another factor in this game that we haven't seen since 2018, not that long ago, but the dynamic this year is very different than the dynamic that year. And what that is, it's a positive feedback loop. So in 2018, if you were winning the scale was lower on your end, and it was easier for you to score on the scale. And the opposite was true as well. So if you were losing the scale, it was harder to score on the scale, and your opponent could rack up points on you that way. So similarly this year, if you're at a cycling deficit and your opponent is outcycling you to the point where you've got 15 power cells in your driver's station, and then they score numbers 16, 17, 18, you immediately have to put those power cells back on the field, whether you're ready to or not. So, and if they're ready to pick up the power cells and you're not, they shorten their cycle by the full field while you are kind of out in the cold and you still have to run full field cycles. So there is a dynamic in this game where if you're ahead, you have the ability to pile on. And if you're behind, it's going to be very, very difficult to catch up. So one thing that I think will be very interesting will be the role of the third robot, both in creating that avalanche and preventing that overflow from happening. So what do you guys think about that positive feedback loop? I know I made a post on Chief Delphi regarding that topic, and it had hundreds of replies, just a crazy amount of feedback on that type of a dynamic in this game. Have you guys thought about that, and how has that impacted the way you plan on playing the match? I guess I have to call on people. Corey, go ahead.
I still haven't been completely sold on the feedback loop thing where you could overload just by the number of balls that could be in robots, but I definitely see that 3 powerhouse teams are going to crush on that idea. One thing, and I was going to ask a question on that with the power cells is how many people are really thinking they're going to have 5 balls in their robot shooting them all the time versus just pick up 2 or 3, shoot them, pick up 2 or 3 and shoot them.
We made it a very high priority that we would hold 5 at a time, mostly because if you're holding 5 and you can unload 5, it reduces the number of times you have to go and collect more power cells. And so our theory was that it'll improve your overall the number of cycles you can do and the number of total power cells that you're able to score.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing about both of those is like that feedback loop concept to me just doesn't seem. It seems relevant to me in only a few contexts, right? One is powerhouse versus some less competitively successful teams, right? You already know that the powerhouse is going to win that. This just means that they're going to win by more, right? I'm not convinced that like in most matches there will be 3 teams on the field or 2 teams on the field or 1 team on the field that are actually capable of scoring fast enough to make that a consistent amount of pressure on the opposing alliance. there's a lot of people that like, I mean, kind of where Corey, where you were getting at, right? With the like, how often do you really think that you're going to be holding and scoring 5 balls at a time, right? Like, I haven't been doing this as long as maybe some of the people in this chat have, but I've been watching these games for about 10 years now, and almost always I see, especially on Chief, especially on forums, people overestimating how much they're going to score. And I would look at how many cycles you were doing last year, right? How many times were you actually able to score a hatch panel or a cargo last year? Like, honestly, not in your best case match, but in your average match, right? In your mean match, how many times were you able to score last year? And then now it's harder to, like, the game piece is smaller. You might want to score. You might want to pick up several of them at a time. I don't like. There's going to be teams. It's going to be a play into high level matches, but I may be a little bit less sold on how much it's going to affect day-to-day matches for most teams.
Yeah, no, I would agree. The feedback loop is kind of an edge case. It's a big disparity between alliances, right? You've got a very strong alliance and a very weak alliance, and that's when it'll happen. But yeah, I mean, most matches in FRC are usually pretty close, so the feedback loop might not be a very big factor, except for creating ranking points for very, very strong teams by getting to stage 3 and spinning the color wheel. There was a really interesting conversation going on in the chat, which I'd like to address, and maybe we could go around the horn again and talk about the idea of a long-range passing bot. Now, I love the idea of a long-range passing bot. So typically people think of this game as a cycling game where you have to go down, score, run back up the field, get your game pieces, go down and score. And if you're a tall robot, that is really painful because you've got to go through the middle of the field. However, I think this game is going to be very, very heavy on feeding. Feeding was a moderately viable strategy in 2016, and there were a lot of things that were working against feeding that year. And if feeding was moderately viable then, where you had to cross the defenses and you couldn't shoot the ball over to your teammate, if feeding was moderately viable then, I suspect it'll be extremely viable this year. You can make it so that you've got each team playing a zone game. You've got one rebounder, basically one front court person who's playing the right by the goal, picking up missed shots and being fed by the feeder bot. And you've got a backcourt player who's scoring from far away or cycling up and scoring close and cycling back and grabbing game pieces like we had talked about. But I think the role of a feeder bot is going to be just extremely, extremely valuable. What does everybody else think? I know, Jason, you had mentioned that that's a role that you might end up playing, and that's a role that you'd love to see your alliance partners play. Care to elaborate?
Yeah, so I think it's just partially I just want alliance members who are open to saying, hey, we came in thinking we were going to play this role, but based on what alliance we have and who our opponent is, we're willing to talk about what's the right strategy, right? Having especially in this game, I think that we're going to see more variety in what alliance strategy is compared to other games, right? Some games it's very clear. Last year, almost every match was one defender, two scoring robots, right? And they pretty much went to town, and a robot pretty much played its same strategy every single match, right? Some robots, pretty much every match I watched of CIS, they were pretty good filling the rocket, and they went for filling a rocket, right? And it made sense, right? And that's what you did. I think this game, we're going to see a lot more mix-ups, right? So CIS isn't going to try and shoot long shots necessarily every time, or what their alliance members are doing with them might change quite a bit match to match. So I think it'll be interesting to see, and having alliance partners who are willing to shake up their role and listen to what they're doing, and you willing to shake up your role, right? And really think about, on a match-to-match basis, how am I going to win this match, right? Not just how am I going to score the most points, but how am I going to make sure that my alliance scores more points than my opponent's alliance?
Jason, I completely agree. I think the diversity of strategy in this game will be very similar to 2013, in which forming alliances that year was incredibly fun, and just very diverse strategies. I'm going to a week 1 event, so we're going to play around a little bit with what works, what doesn't work. I have a feeling that defense is going to be a kind of a big factor, but to the point about long range shooting, a lot of teams are trying to dial in that long shot. And in the chat, Nick just said that far shot is hard. We've done a bit of prototyping, we've done our testing, and I can say with high level of confidence that the long shot is hard. Hitting accurately, shooting quickly, and especially like 3-point goal. I'm not even talking about the 3-point goal. Hitting 2-point shots from 25 plus feet away at a 80+% clip is going to be a very rare thing at a regional. Under 10 teams are going to be able to do it at any given event, I bet. And a lot of teams are designing to play that role. So naturally, it makes sense for teams to want to, or who have a long range shooter to kind of fill that role. And I think one of the things that was difficult last year was getting teams who didn't want to play defense to play defense. That was the meta of the game. It was best to have 1 defender and 2 on offense. Otherwise, it got too crowded on your side, and if you didn't defend the opposing alliance, they could just run away with it. Almost every team built their robot to be an offensive robot. So when you ask them to do something that they didn't design for, that can be a challenge. But this year, I think it's a little different, and I think a lot of people will be very willing to play that long-range feeder role, or even a scuttling role where you drive out, feed the balls, drive back, feed the balls to your front court player. I think being that they're still playing the offensive game, they're still using the mechanisms that they built, I think it'll be a lot easier to negotiate what roles each team is going to be playing. So there's some talk in the chat about climbing and how are people climbing, what is successful, what isn't. I would love to hear, Corey, how are you guys planning on climbing?
We're kind of planning on a little bit of a combination of the telescoping stack of a square tubing. Our shooter mechanism, the whole mechanism is going to tip, so we can't just have a crossbar across our robot the entire time. So one of our stages is going to flip up like a hoop, and then a pipe going to telescope out with 2 arms. Our goal is to grab it with like a wide grip pull-up, so we get 2 points of contact, roughly 24 inches apart onto that pipe, and sit there and wait for another alliance partner to start climbing together. The goal is to keep that pipe, that bar, that hoop, right above the center of gravity of the robot, so as we lift, nothing swings and bends, to make sure that the robot base stays square to the ground.
All right. Jason, how is 2239 planning on climbing?
So we pivoted last week. We started with we started with Snow Problems Climber, which I threw a link in the chat too. So we have a few part-time mentors who also have been on Snow Problems team, but the students found that independently, and so we started with that, and we kind of were running down that idea. And then we switched to square tube instead of round tube, just because it's easier to get different sizes that you want to fit together. So we bought some of that, and we were going to use constant force springs to pull the climber open and extend it, and then have a winch right up the middle of the tubes with the rope right up the middle that would unwind to let the telescoping pole extend, and then wind back up to pull it back down. all going in the same direction so we could use a ratchet. And we started doing that, and that was a pain. We had trouble getting the detail design done. Like, I don't think there was any necessary problem with that design. It just was taking us a long time. We had to move our climber around to a different spot on the robot. We couldn't get everything to fit how we wanted. We scrapped a bunch of stuff. We moved our shooter forward. We changed most of our robot. And then we ended up with an elevator.
I love it. That's how we usually do it too. That's awesome. The iterations it takes to come to your final design. Nick, how is 2220 planning on climbing?
So we didn't get as far as giving up on the telescoping arm and switching to a climber yet. Switching to an elevator yet. We actually finished the detailed design on a telescoping lift about a week ago. We've been waiting on manufacturing it while the rest of the robot was in motion. But there's a lot of tricky things about designing one of those telescoping climbers, and they're really cool, but not easy to design. Like I was working with a few kids for a solid 2.5 weeks designing one of those, from the point where we said, let's do something like that. And we only recently got it to a point where we're actually happy moving forward with that. Maybe not the best route if you are if you have less machining resources.
Yeah, we were going as far as the square tube was all for McMaster, so we get the right sizes. Then we had some access to a Markforged printer.
Yep.
And so we printed some caps to hold the constant force springs and act as bushings to hold the tubes in the right, to keep the aluminum from sliding on the aluminum.
Yep.
And it was working, but just with all the other things we were changing, we scrapped it. I really want to hit it in the off season and try it again.
Yeah, there's such cool mechanisms. They're so cool, and there's a lot of great. We actually, so when we were researching it, and if you're going down that pathway, 1768 team out in New England has a great CAD model of a 3-stage one for their 2016 robot that was like, we were bashing our heads against a wall for a solid week trying to figure out how to do it with very little other resources. And then we took a look at that and we were like, this makes sense now. Yeah.
All right. So I know we're winding down. We've got about a minute left in our scheduled programming. I'll touch quickly on what 4607 is planning on doing for a climber. We haven't CADed. We're going with a 3-stage constant force spring extension, winch up arm system, basically. We've got one arm on either side of our robot. It'll be roughly 22 inches apart. When the hooks come into contact with the bar, the plan is to have them be grippy enough that they don't slide back and forth. We're mechanically connected to the bars, so hopefully we're not swinging back and forth wildly. I know that there are some teams looking to do a buddy climb this year. That was something that we ruled out very early on. Number one, because we think a lot of teams are going to be climbing. And number two, because it wouldn't be a smart decision for our team. We know it would hurt our cycling ability, which is something that we wanted to prioritize. But there are a lot of great resources out there. Again, check out the Open Alliance. They've got many different climbing ideas on there. And if you're really stuck, reach out to any of us. We're always available to help. We love talking with you guys. The next planned call, this is an atypical week. Ideally, going forward, we'd like to do this on Sunday evening. There was something going on Sunday that I had forgotten about. This little thing called the Super Bowl. So when I initially sent a link out, I sent it out for Sunday at 7:30, not realizing that not even I could make that call. So going forward, we like to do Sunday evenings at 7:30. The next meeting will be, or the next call will be February 9th. and we'll send out an email to all of the team lead contacts in the region, and I'll post it through all of my typical communication channels as well. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you for our panel, the Team and Mentors Support Committee. We'd like to increase our impact. So if you've got ideas for how we can help the community to improve, we would love to hear it. Reach out to me at the email that you saw above. Thank you all so much for coming. Thanks, Nick, Jason, Corey, Chris. Yeah, so great call, and have a great night, everybody.
Yeah, can I recap on something really quick?